Growing up in the 1970s was an adventurous and carefree time, where kids still had plenty of freedom. They explored, played, and took risks that would make some people cringe today. Safety certainly wasn't the top priority, but these daring activities did leave us with an independent spirit, and the memories still bring a smile to those who lived through it. So let's take a look back at the dangers kids ignored in the 1970s. In the 1970s, kids still spent quite a bit of time around train tracks. If they weren't placing pennies on the tracks, they might be found hurling rocks at passing trains, or using the rails as a balance beam. Walking along the tracks was common, and making it across a trestle was an adventure for many kids. Despite the dangers, kids would dare each other to keep going, even when they heard the distant rumble of a train. The narrow trestles, which sometimes stretched over deep ravines, added to the thrill. Back then, the potential danger of falling or being hit by a train was a real fear, but some kids still worked up the courage to accept the challenge. Having a BB gun was a regular pastime in the 1970s. Target practice was usually an old soda can, and carrying them around the neighborhood was commonplace. Many kids would also have BB gun fights with their friends. In the 1970s, being shot by a BB was a badge of honor, and no adults were around to tell them to stop. Getting hit on your bare skin would leave a good-sized welt, but it would heal and not stop you from doing it again. Sure, BBs could ricochet and hit someone in the face or eye, but that was just an acceptable risk. In those days, everyone, including parents, seemed to have a much higher tolerance for danger. Exploring abandoned buildings or sneaking onto construction sites was a classic 1970s activity. Kids were outside constantly and would fill their day with all sorts of adventures, including climbing over rusty nails, broken glass, and loose boards without giving it a second thought. The thrill of discovering an empty space and turning it into a secret clubhouse or battleground outweighed the risks of stepping on sharp objects or scraping your knee. No one really worried about it, and most parents didn't even know where their kids were spending their afternoons. The freedom to roam and make some risky choices was what growing up was all about. Rolling down hills in giant tractor tires was the kind of wild, unpredictable fun that made the 1970s an exciting time to be a kid. You'd climb inside and let your friends push you down a steep hill, completely out of control as the tire gained speed. It didn't matter if you crashed into a tree or rolled off into the bushes. It was all about who could stay rolling the longest. You'd of course end up dizzy and banged up, but it was all in the spirit of fun. With no helmets, no supervision, and no way to stop once the tire got going, it was a game that gave kids a shot of pure adrenaline. Playgrounds in the 1970s were a whole different experience, especially with their tall, all-metal structures. Climbing to the top of a hot metal slide or navigating the jungle gym was both thrilling and dangerous. In the summer, the metal would get scorching hot, and kids could easily get burned. And if you fell, you weren't landing on soft rubber mulch like today. There was just hard dirt or even concrete. But this didn't stop us. We would climb onto the merry-go-round just to see how much speed we could take before being thrown off. The swing sets would often lift off the ground the higher you swung, yet we would still see how far we could push it. The 1970s playground may have been the most dangerous place a kid could be, especially when you add in the inevitable dare from a friend. It certainly was an unforgettable part of childhood. Back in the 70s, as kids were roaming free, they often snacked on wild berries or sipped nectar from honeysuckle vines while playing outdoors. It was part of a carefree spirit of the time. If it looked like food, kids would try it, and so would most adults. There was always a slight chance of eating something poisonous or having an allergic reaction, but that didn't stop kids from enjoying nature's bounty. It added to the adventure of playing in the yard or exploring the neighborhood, and most kids were taught by their parents what wild plants were safe to snack on. Building a makeshift bike ramp and daring each other to jump over friends was an everyday thrill for 1970s kids. The ramps were usually cobbled together from old wood, wobbly and unstable, because you had to work with what you could find. You'd see how much air you could get, with friends lying on the ground below, cheering you on. And of course there were no helmets or pads, and crashing was likely. So scraped knees and bruised egos were something that kids learned to deal with. In those days, kids lived for the adrenaline rush and the bragging rights that came with a successful jump. Nothing felt freer than riding in the back of a station wagon with no seatbelts, facing the rear window, and making faces at the cars behind you. In the 1970s, it was common for families to pile into the car for long drives, and kids would often play games or nap in the back, with no worries about strapping on a seatbelt. Parents didn't think twice about it either. It was just how things were done. There were still sudden stops that sent kids flying forward, or turns that made them bump into one another, but it was all still worth it. Thank you to today's sponsor, Factor. Ordering from Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success. With Factor, you get to skip the grocery stores, prep work, and the cooking. And you get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, and even vegan and veggie. I prefer the keto options, and sticking with Factor helped me lose 30 pounds over the summer. Factor was key when it came to sticking to my goals. Skip the overpriced takeout trap. Factor is cheaper and way more delicious. The chef-crafted, restaurant-quality meals come delivered right to your door. They're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means more time for watching Recollection Road. When you go to their website, it's simple to use. Just check out what's on the menu and then select a plan that fits with your schedule. I like to use Factor for breakfast and lunch meals. That way it doesn't interrupt editing videos. A protein shake in the morning and delicious smoked Gouda chicken for lunch sounds pretty good to me. There's no shopping, no cooking, and no cleanup. Did I mention the food is fantastic? Well, it is, and I know you'll love it too. You can also add extras like smoothies, shakes, snacks, and sides that can fuel your entire day. Head to factor75.com or click the link in the description and use code Recollection50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code Recollection50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. In the 1970s, kids would willingly chase after DDT trucks as they spread pesticide through neighborhoods, thinking the thick fog was fun to run through. No one really understood the long-term health risks of inhaling the chemicals at the time. It seemed like just another summer activity, like riding bikes or playing tag, and parents didn't seem too concerned either. The trucks would roll slowly down the street, leaving a cloud behind, and kids would race through it, giggling and trying to stay in the fog as long as possible. When winter came, one of the most daring things kids did back then was something called hookie bobbin, which meant grabbing onto the back of a moving car and sliding on the icy streets. It was like a makeshift sledding adventure, except the cars were real and the ice was unpredictable. The goal was to hold on as long as you could without wiping out and getting hurt. There were many forms of this, some including a rope pulling a sled, but it was the thrill of seeing how long you could hang on while the car sped away. This was especially popular on snow days, while kids were at home and needed fun things to keep them busy. Playing with fireworks was another exciting, though risky, part of being a kid in the 70s. Whether it was cherry bombs or bottle rockets, kids handled them with very little supervision, lighting them off in backyards for fun or trying to blow something up. Sometimes things didn't go quite as planned, with a black cat going off too soon or a bottle rocket shooting in the wrong direction. But that didn't stop kids from eagerly lighting the next fuse. Playing with small-scale explosives was exciting, especially for young boys during this relaxed era. Neighborhood games of football or street hockey in the 1970s were all about rough and tumble fun. Nobody wore pads or helmets, and injuries like scrapes, bruises, and the occasional broken bone were just part of being a kid. Full-contact sports were often expected, and everyone played to win. These games could get intense, and would often go on until the streetlights came on, with the kids settling their own disputes and handling whatever bumps and bruises came their way. In the 1970s, it wasn't unusual to see kids riding bikes, skateboards, or scooters barefoot and shirtless. Summer afternoons were spent zooming down hills, wind in your hair, with nothing between you and the pavement. The risks were clear: cuts, stings, scrapes, and even rashes. But it wasn't something that kept kids from having as much fun as they could. Kids just weren't concerned with covering up. After a rough scrape, Mom was always ready with the Bactine or mercurochrome, and had calamine lotion for things like poison ivy, which was everywhere at the time. And of course, there were always those Band-Aids from the metal tins. I mean, who could forget that Band-Aid jingle from the 1970s?
Depend on the protection of America's #1 bandage.
I am stuck on Band-Aid, 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me.
Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt and sign up for the newsletter. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club. As always, thank you so much for watching.